Just you. No noise, no notifications, no one asking you anything, no one needing anything from you. Just you. How did that feel? For some of you, that felt peaceful, quiet, like a deep breath after a long run. But for most of you, and I know this because I've been there, for most of you, that silence was terrifying. That silence was so loud it was deafening. That silence crept up behind you and whispered all the things you've been running from, the failures you haven't processed, the relationships that left scars you haven't healed, the version of yourself you were supposed to become, but somehow, somewhere along the road, you lost. You can open your eyes now. And I want you to hear me when I say this. That discomfort you just felt, that anxiety that rises up when the world goes quiet and it's just you sitting with yourself, that is not a weakness. That is not a flaw in your character. That is not proof that something is wrong with you. That is proof that you have never been taught one of the most important skills a human being can ever learn. You have never been taught how to be alone. And today that changes time. I'm not here to give you a list of 10 tips to enjoy solitude. I'm not here to tell you to take a bubble bath and light some candles and call it self-care. What I'm here to talk about today goes much deeper than that. What I'm here to talk about today is the kind of aloneness that transforms you. The kind of solitude that strips you down to your foundation and rebuilds you stronger. The kind of being with yourself that most people spend their entire lives running from. And the very few who stop running, who turn around and face it, those are the ones who change the world. Those are the ones who change their own world first. Let me tell you about a man named David. David grew up in a small apartment in Detroit with his mother and two younger sisters. His father left when David was 9 years old. 9 years old, old enough to remember, young enough to be destroyed by it. And from the moment that door closed behind his father, David made a decision. A subconscious, quiet, devastating decision. He decided that being alone was the same thing as being abandoned. He decided that silence meant something was wrong. He decided that the only way to feel okay, that the only way to feel safe, the only way to feel like he existed and mattered and was worth something, was to make sure there were always people around him. So David became the life of the party. David became the guy who was always available, always calling someone, always filling up his schedule, so there wasn't a single gap, not a single moment where he might have to sit with himself. He had hundreds of friends. He was in every group chat. He dated one person after another, not because he was in love, but because he was terrified of what the empty side of the bed might say to him if it stayed empty too long. He was 28 years old, standing in his apartment after his second divorce, and for the first time in 19 years, the apartment was silent. His phone had gone quiet. His friends had gone home. And David stood in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, and he just broke. Hook. He slid down the kitchen cabinet until he was sitting on the floor, and he cried in a way he hadn't cried since he was 9 years old, watching his father's car disappear down the street. And in that moment, sitting on that kitchen floor, David had a thought that changed everything. He thought, I don't know who I am when nobody's watching. I don't know who I am when nobody's watching. How many of you in this room right now, how many of you watching this right now, could say the same thing? Because we live in a world that has made solitude feel like a punishment. We live in a world where if you eat at a restaurant alone, people look at you with pity. Where if you go to a movie alone, you feel like you have to explain yourself. You are learning where you rank. You are learning whether you are the kind of person who gets picked first or last. You are learning whether your hand goes up in class and you are celebrated or laughed at. You are learning whether the lunch table will let you sit down or turn away. You are learning at the cellular level whether you are enough, whether you belong, whether you are the kind of person that other people want to be around. And most of us come out of that gauntlet with some wounds. Some of us come out with small wounds, the kind that fade on their own. But a lot of us come out with deep ones. The ones that calcify into beliefs. Beliefs that whisper, I am only valuable when I am needed. I am only lovable when I am performing. I am only safe when I have people around me. And then we spend the rest of our lives operating from those beliefs without ever examining them, without ever holding them up to the light and saying, wait, is this actually true? Or is this just a story I started telling at age 8 and never stopped? Being alone, really sitting alone with yourself in the quiet, forces that examination. That is why it's scary. Not because you're in danger, but because in the silence, the stories you've been telling yourself finally have to come out and be looked at. And some of those stories, when you finally look at them, don't hold up. Some of them were never true to begin with. They were just the best explanation a child could come up with for the pain they were experiencing. And the thought of letting those stories go, the thought of finding out that the narrative you've been living your entire life might be wrong, that is one of the most terrifying things a human being can face, Dot. But it is also the most liberating. I need to tell you about the year I spent alone. I was 25 years old and I had just ended a 6-year relationship. 6 years, we had been together since I was 19, which means she had been my entire adult life. My entire adult identity had been shaped in relationship with her. The music I listened to was music we discovered together. The opinions I held were opinions that had been formed in conversation with her. The way I saw myself, who I was, what I was capable of, what I deserved, all of it had been built in the mirror of her reflection. And when she was gone, I didn't just lose a relationship. I lost myself. I lost myself. Or rather, I discovered that I had never fully found myself to begin with. I remember the first Saturday morning after we separated. I woke up and the apartment was quiet, and there was absolutely nothing I had to do. Nowhere I had to be, no one expecting me anywhere. And I thought, okay, what do I want to do today? And I sat there, and I genuinely, truly could not answer the question. I did not know. I could not find a single authentic desire beneath all the layers of who I had been performing to be. That terrified me more than anything in the relationship ending. So I did what most people do. I ran. I called friends. I filled the weekends with plans. I downloaded every app. I was going on 3 dates a week with people I didn't care about just to have somewhere to be. I was saying yes to every social invitation, regardless of whether I actually wanted to go. I was running and running and running, and the silence was always right behind me, getting closer. And then one weekend, I couldn't run anymore. I had no plans. My friends were all busy. It was raining. I had nowhere to go. And I sat down on my couch and I thought, I'm just going to have to feel this. I want to be honest with you about what happened next. Because motivational speeches often make these moments sound clean and cinematic and transformative in an instant. Real life is messier than that. What happened next was that I sat on that couch and I felt terrible. Felt lonely and lost, and a little pathetic and more than a little afraid. I scrolled through my phone for a while and put it down and picked it back up and put it down again. I stared at the rain on the window. I started a movie and couldn't focus. I ate an entire bag of chips without tasting them. Thought it was not beautiful. It was not enlightening. It was just uncomfortable and boring and a little sad, and I didn't run. That was the thing. I stayed with the discomfort and let it move through me instead of outrunning it. And something happened that I didn't expect. After about an hour of just sitting with it, the discomfort shifted. It didn't disappear, but it changed quality. It became less like panic and more like quiet. And in that quiet, something small and tentative began to emerge. I found myself walking to my bookshelf. Not because anyone told me to, not because I was trying to impress someone or be the kind of person who reads, but because I actually wanted to. I pulled out a book I had bought years ago and never opened. I sat back down and I started to read. And 2 hours passed like 10 minutes. That was the first time in years, maybe the first time in my adult life, that I had done something entirely for myself. Not to perform it, not to report back to anyone, not to fill time. But because I, myself, David at 25, actually wanted to. It sounds so small. I know it sounds small, but it was the beginning of everything. Because after that Saturday, I started paying attention. Every time I was alone, instead of immediately reaching for my phone or calling someone or turning on noise, I would pause. I would ask myself, what do I actually want right now? What do I actually think about this? Who am I when no one is looking? And slowly over months, not days, not weeks, months. Not days, not weeks, months. I started to find answers. I discovered that I loved silence in the morning. That I was actually more introverted than I'd ever allowed myself to be, because being introverted didn't fit the social personality I'd built. I discovered that I had opinions I'd never voiced because they were different from the people I was around. I discovered that I had been carrying grief, deep, old, unprocessed grief about my childhood, about specific moments, specific people, specific losses that I had been outrunning for so long I'd forgotten it was even there. And I cried. I cried. Not the performative crying of someone who wants to be seen crying, not the cathartic movie moment crying, but the quiet, private, gut wrenching crying of someone who has finally stopped moving long enough to feel what they've been carrying. And on the other side of that crying, I felt lighter than I had in years that solitude offers you. That is the gift that hides behind the fear. Not emptiness, not loneliness, not punishment, but truth, clarity. The truth, clarity, the chance to finally hear yourself. Because here's what I need you to understand. You are having a conversation with yourself every single moment of every single day. There is a voice inside you, running like background software, like a constant commentary, and that voice is shaping everything. Every decision you make, every relationship you enter, every risk you take or don't take, every dream you pursue or bury. It is all being filtered through that voice, through that internal narrative, and most people have never once stopped to really listen to it, to examine it, to ask, is this voice serving me? Is this voice telling me the truth? Is this voice the voice of my highest, truest self? Or is it the voice of old wounds, old fears, old stories that someone else handed me when I was too young to question them? You cannot hear that voice in a crowded room. You cannot hear it over the noise of other people's opinions and expectations and needs. You can only hear it in the quiet, in the alone. This is why the greatest thinkers in human history have always retreated into solitude at their most critical moments. This is not accident. This is not coincidence. Nikola Tesla, one of the most brilliant minds our species has ever produced, spent enormous portions of his life alone. Not because he was broken, not because he was broken, not because he couldn't connect with people, but because he understood that his greatest work came from the place inside him that could only be accessed in silence. He said, "Be alone. That is the secret of invention. Be alone. That is when ideas are born." Henry David Thoreau went to the woods, not running away from life, but running toward himself. He spent 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days at Walden Pond, living deliberately, stripping away everything that wasn't essential. And what he found there, in that radical chosen aloneness, changed the way we understand what it means to live. Albert Einstein would take long walks alone. Long, silent walks where he would just think. Not structured thinking, not problem solving the way we understand it, but a kind of open, wandering attention that allowed connections to form that wouldn't have formed in noise and company and distraction. Maya Angelou rented a hotel room to write, not her home, not a studio, a hotel room that she kept bare, that she arrived at alone in the mornings, where she lay on the bed with her legal pad and found the words that have touched the hearts of generations. These are not stories about people who are unsocial or broken or incapable of love. These are stories about people who understood, profoundly, practically understood, that there are things inside you that can only be found alone. And those things, those are the most important. Those things are your purpose, your authentic voice, your genuine instincts, your real values, not the ones you've adopted from your environment, but the ones that live at the very core of you, the ones that when you violate them, something inside you contracts and whispers, that wasn't right. You cannot find those things in the noise. You have to go somewhere quiet to find them. Now I need to address something because I know what some of you are thinking. I know because I've thought it myself and I've talked to thousands of people who've thought it. You're thinking, but isn't loneliness bad for you? Haven't I read articles that say loneliness is as dangerous as smoking? Doesn't science say that social connection is essential to health and happiness? Yes, all of that is true. And it does not contradict a single thing I'm saying to you today. Because there is a difference, a fundamental transformative difference between loneliness and solitude. And most people confuse them. Most people treat them as the same thing, and that confusion is costing them everything. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. It is the feeling of being disconnected from others when you want to be connected. It is the ache of being unseen, unknown, unloved. Loneliness is passive. Loneliness happens to you. And yes, chronic loneliness is genuinely dangerous. It affects your immune system, your cardiovascular health, your cognitive function, your longevity. The research is clear and it is damning that solitude is completely different. Solitude is the joy of chosen aloneness. It is deliberate, intentional time with yourself. It is not the absence of connection. It is the deepest possible form of connection. The connection with your own interior life. Solitude is active. Solitude is something you choose. And the research on solitude shows something remarkable, that people who actively seek and enjoy solitude are, on average, more psychologically resilient, more creative, more emotionally regulated, more satisfied with their relationships, and more clear about their sense of purpose than people who cannot tolerate being alone. Do you understand what that means? Let me say it again differently. The people who can be alone, who can sit with themselves in quiet and peace and even joy, those people make better partners, better friends, better leaders, better human beings in every interaction with others. Because they are not coming to those interactions from a place of need, they are coming from a place of fullness. They are not looking for someone else to complete them. They are already whole. They are bringing their whole self to the table. The person who can't be alone, who needs constant company, who fills every silence with noise, who jumps from relationship to relationship terrified of the gap in between. That person is not more social than the person who chooses solitude. That person is more afraid. And they are bringing their fear to every relationship they enter. And fear is a terrible foundation for love. I want you to think about the most grounded, most genuinely confident, most fully themselves person you have ever known in your life. Take a moment. Picture them. Feel who they are. I will bet you anything. I will bet every single thing I have that that person has a relationship with themselves, that they have learned in some way to sit with themselves, that they know who they are when no one is watching, that they faced their own silence and found something there worth knowing. That is what you are building when you learn to be alone. You are building that groundedness, that wholeness, that unshakable, magnetic, luminous quality that draws people to you not because you need them, but because you have something to offer them. Because you have been inside yourself and come back with gold. Let me tell you about solitude and creativity. Because this is something I'm passionate about and I don't think it gets talked about enough. Every great creative work in human history, every piece of music that has made you cry, every book that has changed how you see the world, every painting that has stopped you in your tracks, every film that has cracked something open in your chest, every single one of those things came from one person going inside themselves and finding something there that was universal, that was so deeply, specifically, personally true for them, that it became true for everyone. You cannot find that in the noise. You cannot find your most authentic creative voice in a committee. You cannot discover what you really, truly have to say while you're performing for an audience or trying to meet someone else's expectations or scrolling through what everyone else is making and letting it colonize your imagination. Not every artist will tell you this. Not in textbooks, in the honest, private moments when they talk about their process. Every musician will tell you about the song that wrote itself in the middle of the night when they were alone. Every writer will tell you about the chapter that arrived like a gift in the early morning before the world woke up. Every innovator will tell you about the breakthrough that came not in the meeting room, but in the shower, on the walk, in the quiet moment when their mind was finally free to wander where it needed to go. Solitude is not the absence of productivity. Solitude is the birthplace of your most original, most powerful, most genuinely you productivity. And here is where it gets really personal, because I want to talk about relationships. I want to talk about love, because if there is any area of human life where the inability to be alone has done the most damage, it is in the area of romantic love. Think about how many relationships you have seen, maybe relationships you have been in yourself, where the real foundation was not love but fear of being alone. Where two people grabbed onto each other not because they genuinely chose each other, but because the alternative, being alone, seemed worse. Those relationships always end the same way. Because when the foundation is fear, everything that gets built on top of it is distorted. Every decision in the relationship is filtered through, am I going to lose this person? Every conflict is terrifying not because of the conflict itself, but because conflict might mean abandonment, means silence, and silence means being alone with yourself. And that is the thing you have been running from all along.